Okay, you should see the first slide. And I'm going right away give the hands to Richard, that is going to give a few words about the status of the specification, and I will get back to the presentation. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, it does seem to be a very timely moment to be talking about efficient delivery of media over the internet when we're all working at home and clogging things up. It's all the more important to think about our usage of bandwidth efficiently. Just to give a bit of the history here, we got together in the DVB some years ago now to set some commercial requirements for adaptive media streaming over IP multicast, and the technical module of DVB formed a task force to work on that. We produced a first specification a couple of years ago, defining a reference architecture for how this could be done, and some deployment scenarios, which Guillaume will take us through a little bit today. But the good news is that on Tuesday this week, we finally published our second edition, which is a full technical specification. So we think that we've got the everything you need to build an end-to-end system, at least in minimal form, in the edition of Blue Book A176, and I very much encourage you to download that. The URL is at the top left of the slide there, and if you've got any feedback, there's a generic feedback email address at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, without further ado, I'll hand back to Guillaume, who will take you through what is in those pages. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. So let's start first with an overview of Multicast ABR. You will see a lot of animation and graphics, and by the way, the presentation is mostly and essentially based on these graphics. So the legend is here. We're going to talk about Unicast interface. So you will see the dash arrows and configuration interface, and you have these arrows will be black or blue if they are concerned and impacted by the DVB-mABR specification. In addition, you will see also a big, thick, plain blue arrow, which is the multicast interface in itself. You will see in animation a small yellow square, which is a request, whatever. So it means mostly an HttTP request, because the protocol that is used for configuring and controlling the framework is based on HttTP. And the media content, so either the segment or the manifest, will be represented by this gray rectangular box. So before I start, if you have questions, you can, as everyone said, you can send it through the tool, but you can also, I will answer one or two, a couple of questions at the end of, at the middle of the presentation, and I will ask in the meantime not to interrupt that much the presentation. You can always capture my email and send after the presentation questions, and I will be happy to answer it. Okay, let's start. So first, Unicast ABR, a very quick refresh of what it is. It's basically, a player in the terminal that sends requests to get portions of the videos. So on the CDN side, a video is split in segments, in pieces. And not only it is split in segments, but it is also encoding in various qualities. And each of these substreams, quality substreams, is encoded with a different bit rates, and it's segmented in segments of the same duration. On the player side again, the player compute and is capable of measuring the available bandwidth and requesting for its next segment, the next segment of the right, the right quality bitrate. This is the way it works. With that way to do, you can adjust and adapt to the available bandwidth. So this is Unicast ABR. So here what you have on the front of the screen, you have more or less 3, let's say, homes or zones, and each of them is covered by, let's say, a residential gateway or gateway. And behind the gateway, you have the terminals. So the thing is that if each time a terminal wants to initiate a session, and then you will have a unicast connection, a unicast streaming session. So overall, in Unicast ABR, one user is equivalent to 1 video streaming session. And this can become a problem, of course, if you have, let's say, several hundred of thousands of even millions of multimedia sessions working and running concurrently. So the motivation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, just to recall you what was the motivation of, trying to carry and transport ABR content over multicast. As first, you have, this story about multicast versus unicast. With multicast, you can really scale, and you can solve, and you can face this. You can face peaks of consumations. So on the left side, you have an example during the, the tournament, rugby tournaments between England and Wales, and when you have this very important, famous and popular event, you can really and almost double the bandwidth in terms of consumption. This is a very significant peak, and if your infrastructure has not been designed for that, you can be screwed up, right? On the right side, you have optical fiber example of how much bandwidth you can really consume and economize by doing multicast instead of unicast. The second motivation is, of course, ABR for all screens, right? Including the TV screen. And behind this motivation, you have the future IPTV, where if every devices and all the ecosystem share the same, mechanisms and paradigm. I'm talking about the ABR paradigm, and then it's more convenient for managing the streaming services, and this is a win-win for everybody. So that means that also for IPTV, for example, you can imagine that tomorrow IPTV will become ABR IPTV. So what is Multicast ABR? So what we have added for solving and for having multicast in the picture, we use basically two components. In a multicast server that sits and that talks with the CDN. That the multicast server is like a client, is like an ABR player classical. It will get its content from the CDN instead of the player. And then we have a multicast pipe. And then we have on the other side, we have the multicast gateway, which is hosted, for example, in residential gateways. This is all my presentation will talk about these use cases. We will see at the end of the presentation different use cases, different type of deployments we can imagine. So that's basically it. So again, multicast server, you can see here on the animation is getting the content and is forwarding the content over the multicast. And on the terminal side, the player does behave exactly, it's completely transparent for it. It does behave exactly like it used to behave in unicast streaming. Quickly, we don't have anymore one video streaming session per viewer or per terminal or per player. We have one video streaming session per channel, which you can imagine this is a great economy of bandwidth. Okay, now let's dig into the operation. So how does it work? What do we have to do to set up an architecture and a framework like that? So let's start again with the same configuration. We start our multicast server, and the first thing to do if we want to be ready to streaming, is to configure the multicast server. We need to tell to the multicast server that we have a certain number of streams to capture, and we have to transmit these streams over the multicast pipe. The second thing, once the multicast server has been configured, it starts to downstream the multiple service for which it has been configured. Here at the screen, on the screen, you will see only one service. So the multicast server gets the segments, the video segments, and just encapsulates the segments onto the multicast protocol and send it over the multicast feed, the multicast pipe. You can see here that the multicast gateway is not yet ready to consume the segments over the multicast interface. If the multicast, if the CDN, the server, which is completely, transparent, I mean, the multicast ABR infrastructure is transparent for the CDN. So if the CDN supports low latency, for example, CMAF low latency, then all the chain will transport and will support low latency, right? So whatever the service you propose on the CDN side, it will be reflected on the other side. So now, third step, we have configured the multicast server and we are starting injecting the video. On the multicast gateway side, now you need to configure it. You need to tell to the multicast gateway, you have the possibility to access a certain number of streams. Here are the way to get the streams, for example, the multicast IP address. And here is how you should distribute these streams to the player. This is basically what we have in this multicast gateway configuration. So, oh, sorry, I'm going back to this one. We have several ways to configure the multicast gateway. The first configuration method is what we call out of band. We have defined a configuration API. It's a simple REST HTTP kind of API. And you can just send to the multicast gateway the configuration instance, the configuration file. By the way, this is, you will see later that this multicast gateway configuration information has the multicast server configuration information. They are all based on XML, and they are well described in the specification. The second method to configure the multicast gateway, it's called in-band configuration. So here, instead of accessing directly the multicast gateway, which might be not very practical in some situation, we can somehow, the multicast server configuration gathers and include also the multicast gateway part of this, and the multicast server can be configured and can be controlled in a way to forward the part of the configuration related to the gateway in band over the multicast interface. Okay. Now we're going to play. So we've just seen how to configure the multicast server. We need to configure it. The multicast server again resides and is located on the network side, on the operator side, right? We saw how the multicast server gets its content, exactly like a player could get its content from the CDN. We saw how to configure the multicast gateway. At least we saw two methods. We will see another method later. Now we're going to see how to start a streaming session. So it comes first from the player, from the app indeed here. So the application, the player here in this slide is the entity that requests to play from a URL and receive the video, decode it, display it. The app is everything else. So usually when we start a session, the trigger comes always from the application that says, okay, I launch the player and I feed the player with the URL to play. So be careful, it's going to happen. So now I'm going to start the video, the animation. So the multicast server gets its content, it distributes it over the multicast interface. And on the upper right side, you may have noticed that the application has launched the player, giving a URL to play, and the player start to access to the rendezvous service. I'm going to replay it just to be, for you to be, to pay attention. So look at on the right side of the image on the slide. Okay, so the player send a request, the rendezvous service redirect the request in order for the player to access the multicast gateway. This is a transparent mechanism. This is based on HttP redirect. It's completely transparent for the player. And this is a way to effectively do access control. So the rendezvous service is an essential piece that will do access control. It will check that the player is authorized to play the content. It will check whether the content is effectively sent over the multicast interface. And if everything is green light, then the rendezvous service will redirect the request to the multicast gateway through the player. And the video can start. That's our regular mode. Now let's see what's the third way to configure the multicast gateway. We are still in the same, we're going to start again a session from the player. But in that time, the rendezvous service is going to piggyback in this request redirection some parameters, some information, basically everything that is required to configure the gateway for that particular session. So let's start. Again, the multicast service with content, it broadcasts, it multicast the content to the multicast gateways. And on the top, the player has requested a content, the rendezvous service has accepted the request, he has redirected the request thanks to HTTP redirect, and he has piggybacked what we call a just-in-time configuration that will be digested by the multicast gateway. And the multicast gateway, after interpreting this just-in-time configuration, will be capable of delivering the content to the player. So let's continue. Here we go. Now the player has the content, he can start displaying and the video. Right? So we saw three different methods to configure the multicast gateway. The first one is called out of band. It's a simple, REST API to configure remotely the multicast gateway. The second method is through the multicast interface. It's relying on the multicast server configuration. And the third method is called just-in-time configuration. So we have defined all these methods because we had the experience of a different kind of deployments where one method is easier than the others, and you can even combine those methods. We will see that later. So now, why I showed you up to now and so far only multicast, let's say, the data being delivered through the multicast interface. We saw that the Unicast is used mostly for control, right, for starting the session. But Unicast and HTTP Unicast can also be used by the multicast gateway for other operation. The first one is repairing. We call it HTTP Unicast repairing. If packets or content that is delivered over the multicast interface get, for some reason, corrupted, there are missing bytes, the multicast gateway has the possibility to retrieve the missing pieces of the content through, from the CDN using byte range requests, which are standardized HTTP mechanisms to get portion of contents. So let's run again the animation. As usual, the multicast server gets its content, broadcast its content, and you can see that when the multicast server sends its contents, there are white space, white blocks. These are parts that the multicast gateway needs to repair. So the multicast gateway will send a request to the CDNs to get the missing bytes. And once the segment is completed, the multicast gateway can forward it to the player, right? So one may ask, why not use forward correction, which exists and possible. We will see that we have multicast, we have standardized two different multicast protocols, and they are both propose fake forward error correction. So it can be used, but it's also optional, so it may not be used for different reasons. And even with forward error correction, you might still need to repair. That's not impossible. Okay, so this was HTTP unicast repair. Now let's see another mechanisms that is required and that is based on HTTP unicast is we call it HTTP unicast assistant. The idea here is for helping the multicast gateway to retrieve segments that won't be delivered by the multicast server. That may be segments that have been delivered and they are not in the cache of the multicast gateway anymore, for example, or that may be for some reason video segment that have completely disappeared. So here, the way it works, the multicast gateway, if the multicast gateway detects that there is something missing, the multicast gateway receives the request from the player, and if it cannot, provide the requested segment, the multicast gateway will request the segment from the CDN. So here, the illustration on this slide, you see a different content, could be the beginning of the content, for example, that is not anymore in the cache of the multicast gateway. So this content is retrieved from the CDN by the multicast gateway in a way that it is completely hidden to the player. And then if I click, once the content is in sync, on the request from the player are in sync with the content received over the multicast interface, the multicast gateway can switch to the multicast interface. So we just see a way to provide, to use and to operate HTTP unicast for getting segments that are not available in the cache and not available over the multicast interface. There is a second mechanism that is also provide the same HTTP unicast assistance, that is to go through the player. For some time, the multicast gateway may not have sufficient resources, CPU resources, for example, to do this, getting the segments, forwarding the segment, to this kind of proxy work. If it has not the resources, there is a possibility to operate HTTP redirect. So let's see what is going on. The multicast gateway waits the request from the player, and instead of answering the request, it redirects the request from the player, and the player will ask itself the missing segments. It's again transparent to the player because it's based on HTTP redirect, which all players support, and it's avoid consuming too much CPU resources in the multicast gateway, and it provides exactly the same service than the slides we just saw before, right? So the last portion of what I wanted to share with you about the operating mode is what we call the collocating mode. We saw that the rendezvous service is treating and is processing the first request. It does access control and all that stuff. It can sit everywhere. So it can sit, basically it will sit in the telecom operator services, premises, sorry. But it can sit also in the same host than the multicast gateway. So this is why we call it the collocating mode. So it works the same. So let's run the animation. The multicast server gets the video, send it to the multicast gateway, and the player send a request to the rendezvous service. The rendezvous service return the request, redirect the request, and the player can get the content from the multicast gateway. In this example, the rendezvous service is configured through an out-of-band method, but it could perfectly be configured through the other methods. Okay, so now I can take maybe one or two questions, and I will switch then to the standard and to explain you how is organized the standard and what do we have in this standard, in this specification. How do we do that? Egwan, do you have a question or two?
Just it's Richard here. Just to say,
Richard, yes.
I've been trying to answer some of the questions in the
Okay. Yep.
Q&A as we go along. I've been typing as fast as I can.
Okay.
So yes, Richard, it's great having Richard on board here for this because everybody has access to the questions that he has answered.
Okay.
And what I can also say to you is that you can vote on questions as well, either once they have been submitted or also once the questions have been answered. So I think, Guillaume, we'll let you continue with your presentation, and we'll keep going because Richard is doing such a great job with dealing with the questions there as well.
Perfect. So we just saw the mode of operation, right? So we just see that for implementing and deploying Multicast ABR, DVB Multicast ABR, you need basically a multicast server and a multicast gateway. Right? There are two entities. One sits in the telecom operator premises, the multicast server. It can manage multiple streams, multiple services, multiple channels, whatever you like to call it. And it knows how to get the content from the CDN, exactly like a player does today. And then it can forward the content over the multicast interface according to a multicast protocol, and we are going to see what is exactly this multicast protocol. On the other side, we have a residential gateway in these examples, but the multicast gateway can be installed and deployed in any kind of gateway, including, not in the home, but possibly also in the telecom operator premises. What we saw also is that the mode operations includes a third very important component that is called rendezvous service. And the rendezvous service, again, is what the entity that is contacted and by the player, the first entity that is contacted. And this entity does access control, does check whether this requested service is indeed multicasted over the ABR multicast. So now we're going to see what we have specified and standardized in this spec. So first of all, you can here see again all these major entities, that main entities that I just displayed when I went through the operating modes. So what we have standardized first is the data model. As I was talking about how to configure the multicast server and the multicast gateway, we need a data model. It's been standardized in XML. So then we have, specified an API for configuring the multicast server. It's a simple REST API, but it's important to have a well-known means to configure the multicast server. Then we have standardized the way to configure the multicast gateway. Again, we have three different methods: an out-of-band REST API, an in-band multicast method that goes through using and controlling and configuring the multicast server, and a just-in-time configuration method operating HTTP redirect. I just explain you already and show you an example of it. Then we have described the system operation. All the slides I just went through. These are a standardized way of starting and running this framework. And then we have optional parameters. When you start a session, you can give specific parameters that I will talk about it a little bit later, but basically it's used for an easier integration of the framework, or also used for operating the framework from a content provider perspective. I will give you a few words about that later. We have a mandatory unicast repair protocol, which is very basic. It mandates HTTP byte range feature, which is normally almost everywhere. And we have mandatory two multicast protocol. One, which is flute, based on 3GPP MBMS flute, and the other profile, which is based on ATSC 3.0 root. It's OR, it's mandatory, but it's or. That means you're not obliged to implement both, but you have to implement at least one of these two profiles. These are profiles which makes this profile is a DVB specific, right? This is very important to understand. It's not fully compatible with what you have in 3GPP and BMS, and it's not fully compatible with what you have in ATSC 3.0 for various reasons. One reason was that they were not very ready to carry or transport low latency, CMAF, low latency objects like we planned to do with this specification. We have then multicast server operation. So we explain, we don't give anything about implementation, but about operation. Means what's the duty of the multicast server, what the multicast gateway has to do to allow and enable correct operations. Okay, we have also an informative part. So the informative part is about, we give examples of how to, write a multicast gateway configuration or a multicast server configuration, by the way. We have a protocol for detecting or discovering the multicast gateway in a local, in a LAN, in a home network. This is informative. You're not obliged to use it. It's just that it can facilitate some deployments. This is why it is there. And then we have specified and we have described with more attention the low latency operation. We have also adding some text and some explanation about how to handle a presentation manifest. And finally, we have guidelines for both flute and route profiles. So here you will see the stack. This is a data plane stack, right? This is its format, content, and DRM agnostic. So what you have in blue, it's what we have mandated. This is what we have specified, right? So this is for the broadcast multicast part. This is the two profiles, the two DVB profiles, GPP flute and ATSC route, and that's it. And on the other side, there is HTTPS. On the top of this MABR, DVB-mABR data plane specification, you can carry, basically it's agnostic, right? So you can carry whatever contents. Here on the figure, I mentioned HLS and MPEG-TS. It could have been smooth streaming as well. We didn't, So we mentioned here DVB dash because we had a particular attention. We had a focus. We wanted to be sure that it works, perfectly with the DVB dash profile for those who know this specification. But basically, and this is the mechanisms, DVB-mABR is agnostic regarding, again, the format, the content, and the DRM. So let's see the phase 2. So this is for the next phase. The next phase will start probably, after the summer or somewhere like that. Now with the phase 1, we will give you a few words at the end, but basically we have an observation, let's say a feedback period where we need to get feedback from the standard bodies and with which we have had in the past regarding this specification, some relationships, some communication. So we need feedback basically, and feedback from you also as well. You have a way to give some feedback, and that every feedback will be fruitful, I guess, and will be important for us. So in this phase 2, we're going to work on non-live delivery. Oh yes, very important, by the way. Multicast ABR phase 1, the focus was on live streaming, right? Very important. Although nothing precludes to do non-live delivery, we didn't write a line about this particular use case. So that's what we want to do for the phase 2. We will have a specific unicast, an extra unicast repair protocol, probably. We want to add authentication between the multicast gateway and the multicast server, which doesn't exist today. Maybe we will have a new optional multicast protocol that can be helpful in particular situation. We want to add a reporting service We have today in phase 1 the basics. I mean, very teeny specification for allowing that, but we didn't specify at all full protocol and what kind of data we want to report and so on. And we want to add a full specified HTTPS section. So today is the framework, I mean the architecture, the phase 1 specification is completely compatible with HTTPS, of course, but it may be difficult in some situations to implement it. You have to be careful on some things, and because we didn't write, at least we need guidelines, and we didn't write it for the moment. So we might add this kind of information in the phase 2. In the phase 2, we'll maybe work on new topics. This is, it's not validated yet. It's just for your information. Just, so there are here 2 important features from our perspective. One is about ingest protocols. We didn't specify and recommend anything. Maybe we could be more restrictive here. On the other side, on the multicast gateway, we may specify the mode, what we call multicast on demand, where dynamically the multicast gateway could switch. Well, not only the multicast gateway, but let's say the system could switch between unicast and multicast on demand, based on multiple criteria. Okay, that's it for the standard. And I'm going to take now, yeah.
Thanks, Guillaume. So Richard is doing a fine job here with answering all the questions. Everybody has access to be able to read the answers that Richard is typing, but I hope that they're also paying attention to what you're saying, Guillaume, at the same time. I propose that we'll continue on with the deployment section here, and then we should have time for questions at the end.
Okay, so everybody saw all the questions. That's what you said, huh?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So let me then start with the last part of the presentation. Hoping I'm not going too fast, because I reckon that it is a lot of information to digest. So the last part is about the deployments. So let's start with the first obvious one, which is over broadband. Simply stating, this is typically an ISP, a telecom operator, that wants to deliver multicast ABR over its infrastructure, in multicast infrastructure. So it needs to host a rendezvous service, like I said already. And it needs to deploy a multicast gateway entity, software. It's a software entity, or let's say agent, in the residential gateway. The second use case I wanted to share with you is that it's relying or operating the broadband set-top box. So in that case, the residential gateway is not concerned anymore. The multicast gateway agent is hosted in a set-top box. This deployment is possible as long as you have between the multicast, between the set-top box and the residential gateway, the capability to carry multicast traffic. So this is typically possible with some deployments. Operators typically, when they sell their triple play service, usually send to the customers the residential gateway with the set-top box, and the later one is connected through a dedicated port on the residential gateway, ensuring a good multicast transport between the residential gateway and the multicast gateway. So let's go to the next one. So here we have in having a typical broadband network for proposing and implementing this multicast transport facility, we use a satellite, for example, or it could be any one-way broadcast technology, by the way. So the multicast server is connected to the multicast gateway with a one-way min. But on the multicast gateway side, this one can, rely on unicast service, whatever the multicast, your unicast connection is implemented, it has to be there and allowing the multicast gateway to remember repair missing packets or getting assistance from HTTP assistance for missing segments. And on the terminal side, the terminal still rely on the Unicast service that is also available in the home. Now we have in this case a real one-way case. So here it requires the rendezvous service be colocalized with the multicast gateway, very important. So in that case, there is no possibility of feedback channel. So the terminal is, still contacts first the rendezvous service, like I showed you earlier in the presentation. The rendezvous service is configured through the multicast interface, like I showed you again also previously. And it works the same for the terminal, right? It's completely transparent for it. But on the multicast gateway cannot rely on the Unicast assistance. It cannot repair, cannot solve cache miss, for example. So just to let you know that this kind of deployment exists already on the market. It is the one-way deployment, but also the deployment with satellite operating a Unicast and a feedback channel. Both are deployed today. So the last one I wanted to show, it's maybe not for although it exists, it's not maybe for the most important use case, but just to let you know that it's possible. So in this use case, we have a multicast gateway. A multicast gateway that is hosted by one device, the residential gateway, and another one that resides and hosted by a set-top box, for example, a satellite set-top box here. And then we have a rendezvous service that is colocalized with the first multicast gateway in the residential gateway. So the rendezvous service might have been localized also in the network, right? It's just one case. So just wanted to show you that it's perfectly possible to have more than one multicast gateway in the home, or let's say accessible by the end user terminal. It's perfectly possible. The rendezvous service knows how to handle that, right? So in that particular use case, just the bubble say that in that particular use case, the multicast gateway hosted in the set-top box has no return channel. So this is a one-way configuration. However, on the other multicast gateway has a feedback channel. Okay, the last case I wanted to talk to you and share with you is the third-party content provider. We made this specification for solving and for enable the case where a content provider having no network, there is no capacity and not possibility to reach the end user terminal through a multicast service. I mean, we enable the possibility for this content provider to somehow interconnect with the operator CDN. With the ISP, with the telecom operator. So it opens the door of a kind of new business model. The telecom operator that own multicast ABR service can perfectly open it as a business service. And assuming that there has been a kind of peering agreement between the content provider and the telecom operator, then there is no problems to, for the content provider to operate also multicast ABR. So the way it works, the first request goes from the terminal to the content provider CDN. This one recognizes somehow that this request comes from a terminal that is equipped, that has the possibility to access to a multicast gateway that belongs and that is owned by an operator the content provider has a peering agreement with. In that case, the router request, the entity in the content provider CDN can redirect the request to the rendezvous service it is aware of. So it redirects the request, and once the request has been redirected to the rendezvous service will check that this request comes from an authorized content provider, and we have all these, remember, these optional parameters I've talked to you about. Thanks to these optional parameters, the rendezvous service can check and can authenticate the content provider, and then it continues to work as I already described to you. So with that last use case, it terminates my presentation. I'm just going to sum up again what we saw. We saw first how to operate DVB Multicast ABR. We saw the different elements that compose the framework, the architecture. Then we had a look more precisely on the spec. What are the components that have been the subject of the specification of the standard? Then we saw what would be the phase 2, because here we are talking about the phase 1. The publication is about the phase 1. And then we saw a couple of use cases, important use cases, the most, let's say, the most deployed use cases, most important, and also some use cases that will be maybe interesting for a midterm future. That terminates my presentation, and I and Ewan or Richard for questions.
Guillaume, thank you so much for that comprehensive presentation. I will make your slides available within the next few minutes from the DVB website. Richard has done a fantastic job in working his way through the questions. In fact, Zoom, I have noticed the platform that we're using does not offer me a simple method of saving the questions and answers, but I will somehow capture them, all of the ones that Richard has answered, and I will make that text available with the questioners' names removed on the web page as well. So I will do that. There's a couple of questions there which you might like to deal with, Guillaume. One is from Alan, who is asking whether there will be any open source software implementations available to do some testing with related to MABR. Indeed, he's asking whether Broadpeak might even make some of their software available for testing.
Yeah, good question. So I think we've started, I mean, maybe we can answer that question partly because in DVB we are doing more and more this kind of operation, right? This kind of.
So yes, I mean, V&V, what we're calling verification and validation, is becoming a very important part of the process here, and it applies to all of our specifications. Richard may know a little bit more as to whether we have something specific planned already for MABR.
So the quick answer is that we haven't planned anything specifically at the moment. But yes, I mean, I agree. It would be good. And the other aspect, of course, is interoperability between equipment from different vendors. I mean, that takes quite a lot of effort to organise plug fests and so on. But yes, these are all relevant topics that will need to be looked at. Yeah.
Well, I think since we have the co-chairs of the TM-MCAST group here, I think they will have taken note of that question, Alan, and indeed take it back to the group. There's a question there. Guillaume, you have something more you wanted to say on that? No,
absolutely. I mean, exactly. That's something that we have to analyze precisely. What can we exactly start with in terms of open source? But then definitively it's now usually a way we have to go through, try to open source some of the pieces that are necessary for validate this framework, for helping to build this framework.
Sure. There's a question from Julien there. How do generic players know that a multicast gateway is available? Would a library be integrated in the players?
So that's the part. First of all, normally it can be fully transparent because it may not, there are different cases. It may completely be unaware because everything is in the URL, right? So if it needs for some reasons to be aware of the presence, of the existence of a multicast gateway, I mentioned that in the presentation, there is a discovery possibility to discover the existence of the local multicast gateway. But this is an informative part. This is not obliged to implement, and just informative.
Okay, good, clear.
Mm-hmm.
So unless we have any other questions, and I don't see any coming in there now, and again, well, Bram Tollemans has raised his hand. I was just about to mention an event that Bram Tollemans is involved with, and I'm wondering if he wants to mention that himself. Let me see if Bram is ready with a headset on him. Bram, you should be able to talk now if you want to.
Hello, yeah.
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead. This is Bram Tollemans from the European Broadcasting Union.
Hello all. Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you, Richard, for very interesting, very good work. Very good work indeed. I was wondering, a question first. I was wondering, you were talking about the next version, including also on-demand material. Also, are you also considering to have, for example, cache functionalities at the multicast server or gateway available?
I mentioned it very quickly in the phase 2, let's say, complements things that I mentioned that we focus for the phase 1 on live delivery, but I mentioned that we have imagined also pre-positioning, or let's say what kind of content management. And yes, there was this potential caching issue, or let's say a caching feature or prepositioning feature associated with the multicast gateway. But again, this is something that we have to review with our marketing group colleagues to prioritize and see what is makes more sense to work on first, according to the the market market interest.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I see we have another question that has come in there. Bram, do you want to quickly mention Broad Thinking, which is on Tuesday and Wednesday next week?
Tuesday, Wednesday next week, 2 days of topics. It's our normal event, but we went totally online. Obviously, we didn't want to throw away all that information and all interesting information out there. And so we have a 2-day conference online. You can find all the information on EBU Broad. If you search on EBU Broad Thinking 2020, you'll find the program and the registration link. Yeah, it's all
great.
on Zoom also.
Thanks for that, Bram. We will turn to a question here from Francois, who's asking Guillaume, Richard, how do you integrate the nano CDN component in the gateway?
That's a question for me, because nano CDN is the name, is let's say the Multicast ABR service by Broadpeak. So I'm not sure to understand the questions, because integrating the nano CDN in the multicast gateway, I'm not sure if I well interpreted the questions, but it's maybe how we integrate the DVB multicast gateway in the physical gateway. Was it the question? Because nano CDN is really exactly our private implementation. So that's something else.
Okay, so that's something I'm going to encourage Francois to contact you directly for that,
exactly.
as it's a Broadpeak product. So with that said, I am going to say thank you to everybody for joining this webinar. We were north of 150 participants throughout the webinar, which is fantastic. And sincere thanks to Guillaume especially, and also to Richard for the sterling work he has done on answering all of those questions that came in. As I say, I will try to capture all of those Q&A and make them available via the website as well, with the questioners' names missing from it. If you visit now dvb.org/webinars, you will find in just a moment the slides that Guillaume presented available there. And you'll also find the links where you can register for the upcoming webinars. I'm guessing for this audience, there may be a particular interest in the Dash Industry Forum webinar, and also in the webinar from Rafael Mercuria from Unified Streaming, who will be talking also about aspects of DVB Dash and low latency and so on. So with that said, I would like to thank everybody for joining the webinar, wish everybody the best wherever you are in the world, and look forward to talking to you at one of our future webinars. Oh, wait, hang on, look at this. Questions? Oh no, these are just nice comments coming from people. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind. Someone says they're getting a 404 not found on dvb.org/webinars. If you have it should be working for you. Some people had some problems with adding a trailing slash or not adding a trailing slash to that. But in any case, just go to dvb.org and click through to webinars. I will look into that 404 error and see if there's a reason why it's still coming up. So thank you all for joining, and we will talk to you again. Thanks.
Bye-bye.